All right, so we've got Greg Peck calling in once again. We've got him on the record. Greg, you there?
Absolutely.
Well, you want to talk? Let's talk. What's going on? You've been hitting, I guess, the viralness in the world with your first interview. You want to get back on the record. We said we can't do it on Blog Talk Radio with open-ended questions from people live. What's going on?
Well, I'd be glad to take any question live, you know that, because what they do, I got great feedback on the interview, but then they'll say, well, you went too long, you changed subjects, you did this, that, and the other thing. But I said, well, did I say anything that really said anything but this? Let's do what's ever in the best interest of health and welfare of horses and the betting public and everybody involved, and we'll really do well in life, and we'll probably grow the business because we really got to get some new customers.
So I've returned from Springfield. You tried calling me. Well, we talked on the way down, and then you actually called me as I was showing up. I've returned from Springfield, still trying to recuperate. I'm getting old myself. And we've now gotten the information about the bands with the Illinois State Fair. We're going to be promoting hard, but we talked a lot with people down in Springfield. They're well aware of the interview. I mean, what's the response you're getting, if I can say worldwide, from, I guess, your breaking exclusive interview with us?
Well, it's this way, that anybody who is open, interested, and all objective, that is not set. For instance, I don't know if I mentioned it the other day, I hired a woman, an African-American woman. She was the first general in the U.S. Army. It was like General Marcia, and I should remember the last name. It was a long time ago. But what she did was that she had trained the administrative staff at the Environmental Protection Agency. That was back in the Clinton years for me. And when she said to them, the issue was this. She said, you know, you're hearing me, but you're really not listening to me, and you're really not acting in a manner that is in the best interest. In those days, you know, I mentioned about moving the nuclear waste. You're basically, you know, waiting to move on to something else, but I'm not convincing you. You certainly are going to do nothing, you know, to further what everybody's overall agenda should be. And I can see the same thing with horse racing. That's kind of what's happened, that everybody wants to have their part in it, and they're going to do what they're going to do. There's nothing I can say or do to make them change their mind.
So back in the day, you had been interviewed by people like Ken Warkentin live at the Meadowlands. You were interviewed even with Harold Howe with the Harness Edge. Recently, you've been interviewed, and you said you stayed with, or Ryan stayed with you, I guess, in Canada or wherever you were up in Newton Township at the time. You know, you had a two-part series with him. I mean, what's going on as far as feedback from this interview now that, again, is breaking worldwide? I mean, you spoke the truth, the whole truth from your standpoint, and people are kind of, I'm not going to say afraid, but they're kind of realizing, like, what's really going on? Like, what is the issue? Is it HISA? Is it the welfare of the horse? I mean, really, where do you stand with this whole omnibus bill that President Trump, I guess, signed and is potentially going to become legislation?
Well, I have to look into it more because it was put through by Mitch McConnell, and I said you'd almost have to see if someone in Mitch's office was available, and maybe I probably would have a contact or somebody would know somebody because of my experience in the Republican National Committee, so it's possible. But we essentially are talking a lot about two issues, one being HISA and the other one being the whipping. You know, we had the Monmouth riders ride whipless, and I see some of the numbers where they said that, you know, that it kind of didn't matter, but they weren't quite sure. But Bill Finley wrote a good column on it. I read it. He's a good journalist, and he looks at the facts, and he looked it over, and, you know, but again, and I think you had some involvement. You kind of said you had an idea about doing something that was current and a couple of times weekly, and he kind of took it, ran with it. But I see that he did kind of an expose on what happened with the whipless rides at Monmouth, and it seemed okay, I guess. I don't know. I don't agree with it. We essentially have that, and then you have the whole HISA issue. But And I really have never heard of anybody that says they don't go to the races because they drug the horses or they whipped them. I've never heard of that before, but we seem to keep bringing it up. And ironically, the only national coverage we got quite a piece of the Philadelphia Inquirer as well as the New York Times, and both said they talked to actually. We talk about we want to go on the coattails of the thoroughbreds, so we got in those publications based on the thoroughbreds and the catastrophic injuries. However, they both pretty well said in the standardbreds it's relatively non-existent, and it is. I mean, we had one a couple of weeks ago, which was an accident, but I was thinking where I grew up with a lot of cheap horses, I don't ever remember having seen a catastrophic injury. Well, that's quite a thing where if you go to Philly Park on a Tuesday afternoon or something where you have the low-class claimers of thoroughbreds, you'll see them get trailered off all the time with some kind of a catastrophe, not necessarily a life-ending one or a life-threatening one, but you certainly see a lot of them.
So let me just give you an example. So yesterday I was down at Springfield, and a second trainer actually pulled me into his barn, and he wanted me to check out a horse. So he brings me to the stall, and I'm sure you've done this multiple times in your career, and he says, do you mind checking out this horse? And I look in the stall, and I'm like, back right stifle. And he looks at me, and he's like, what? I'm like, you could see it from here. It's flaring. So I said, can I get into the stall? So he says, sure.
With the whip, you mean?
No. This is just a horse he wanted me to check out. He's on lease with this horse. I actually communicated with the trainer that had him for 4 years. He knows who he is. And, I said, can I, get into the stall with him? He goes, sure, but he might kick you. And I said, no horse has ever kicked me. I had one horse that stepped on my foot. His name was Broadway Circuit, who got boxed in the 1992 Orange and Blue for 200 and something thousand. But back to the story. I mean, can you look at a horse and know if they've got bowed front tendons right away? Can you look and tell if they've got a bad stifle or a hock with your experiences, I guess, growing up with those broken down horses?
No, you'd have to.
Do you personally?
They talk about you can pick up the feet, look at the shoes, how they're wearing them. But a lot of when you diagnose soreness in a horse, you look as a confirmation. I can remember when I first moved down here, Dr. Steele, from Vernon, veterinarian. And frankly, I can remember Dr. Vince Baker, who I mentioned in an interview, who would be the veterinarian for Bob Batter at Sanity until this day, and Wayne Lucas in his heyday, said the standard-bred veterinarians were, because remember, you have a gaited horse who, it's not where the thoroughbreds, they run, at their natural gait. But it's not that easy. But Dr. Steele, I noticed what he would do was to look at the confirmation. So if he saw one was back at a knee or something, well, chances are it was back to the right knee, and it wouldn't be the right knee that was bothering them, and maybe they might get off the left hind because it seems that they, go to the opposite corner. But again, it just depends. But I think that more often than not, sorenesses are pretty diagnosable, and usually it's based on starts with confirmation.
But I mean, can you, as a horseman, with all the experience that you've had, visually see these things? Like, do you have that ability to sense energy, to sense the way they're standing, like you're saying, with confirmation? Can you see that stuff, or do you have to bring an outsider in?
Behind it's like feel, vision and hearing is very important. You can sense in the rhythm. It would be like, I'm sure the conductor of a symphony with he or she with their ear, can have a sense that
I see what you're saying.
Somebody is not hitting the instrument just right. The drum is not just hitting right. The trumpet is not just hitting right. So there's a certain feel of horses as well.
So, for instance, you're driving your car right now, and I hear the rhythm of the car. You've got me on speaker or Bluetooth, and I can hear you clear as day.
By the way, everybody should know this was totally unplanned. It's not like I sat down and people said, typically, if I was training a senior executive to go on and speak to the media, obviously I would have them in a position that would state, support, illustrate, and restate basically the message that they had negotiated to talk about, but I'm not a publicly traded company. I don't operate under Sarbanes-Oxley, so I think it makes for better listening that I do,
But
kind of respond to
let's
different things.
let's get back to the question.
Before you ask any more questions, people should know that was totally unplanned.
I'm going to get to something that you're mentioning with a gate. So your truck sounds smooth, okay? Do you hear anything in your car right now? Does it sound smooth? Do you hear anything on the front or back or anything with the rhythm?
It's a Cummins diesel made by Nissan that I bought in Canada. There's only a few of them, and Cummins has always been a great diesel, but they used to be very loud. But I know my brother Joe, who's still in Nova Scotia with a couple service stations, always said the Cummins diesels were best. This one hums along pretty nice. There's no doubt about it. So I can't say that there's anything out of line.
I'm pretty good with cars, and I jumped into this Nissan.
I'm not, by the way.
I jumped into this Nissan Versa yesterday. I had a one-day rental. I left at 6 a.m. I was back at 5 p.m. And we had a dropped call. So we're going to try to attempt to call Mr. Peck back. The call dropped. Apparently he's in a bad zone. And we're going to continue this live.
Can we do this?
So we're still going. Obviously, we had a dropped call.
There?
So I'm here.
Hang on.
I'm here.
Now that I'm going to get a consistent signal from here to Newtown, can we start over again?
Well, let's just keep going. I'm still recording. So
no, I'd rather start over because I really, now that I know, okay, I know where to go with this. Let's just hit it again. Can we do that?
I'm still
signal from here to Newtown.
I'm still going, Greg. So I jumped in the car yesterday, and I was thrown in at 5:30 the night before. I wake up, to go to Springfield. We had talked before I left, and I immediately noticed something on the right side. And I drove all the way down there with this either power steering or alignment issue. And when I came back, I said to the guy at Enterprise, the car was great, the mileage was great, but there's something wrong with the right side. He goes, oh, it must be an alignment issue. I said, I don't know anything about cars. I'm not a mechanic, but I'm not stupid. I go, if you're going to try to...
The only difference there might be between an automobile, like if you had a low right front tire, your car would bear to the right. Where if a horse had a sore right front knee, it would bear to the left.
So you could feel that and sense that. You could feel that and sense that in a horse.
Yeah, but remember, though, that his head is being turned to the right because you're pulling it that way, where if you let it go, he would be turning it to the left to get away from the horse. Where the low tire would go toward where the low spot was, where the horse who's sore on the right side typically veers to the left side.
Okay, so let's go back to this horse yesterday. So I get into the stall, and I knew that it was the back right stifle. I didn't know that he had bowed front tendons on both sides. I didn't know this until today, until I talked to his...
Are you saying that he had tendons?
Visually, I could see his back right stifle. There was something going on. I didn't know about his both front bowed tendons until I talked to his trainer of 4 years today.
Bowed tendons?
Well, I didn't know this at the time yesterday.
Well, no, because that's very rare today. Very rare about tendon today as compared to what it used to be years ago.
So
you never really hear of them now.
I jump into the stall, and I don't touch the horse because I asked for permission. So I put my hand over his right stifle. He immediately raises his back right leg. I mean, the horse could feel and sense my energy without palpating him. And again, we got dropped by Mr. Peck, and we're going to continue to record on the record. This is Eric Potter's The Horseman's Voice, live from Morton Grove, Illinois. And with that, Mr. Peck is not answering. We are going to be signing off. This is Eric.
Make a U-turn.
He is there. We're not going to sign off. We're still going, Greg.
Hang on. I'm losing you. Hang on. And I got to get turned around. Hang on.
Keep dropping and dropping and dropping.
Turn left after 500 feet onto Chesterfield Town Road.
We're still recording, Greg, so I guess everybody listening out there, he's turning around, and we've got the GPS going. Is that Alexa, or is that...
I haven't been able to hear you for the last 2 or 3 minutes because you were... Yeah, I had no signal.
Okay.
So I don't know what you said. But...
So, when you sense something with the horse, you just get off the horse, you found a problem. You said you touch them. I mean, do you palpate them? Do you touch them? Do you just call the vet immediately? Like, what's the next step in your mind? Like, is there something wrong with them? You start freaking out? Do you ask the groom, the person taking care of them? I mean, what do you do as a trainer with your knowledge and skill set when you sense or feel the alignment or, the air in a tire low on a horse, like you're saying with the car?
Well, I'm old-fashioned. I mean, now the veterinarian is, it seems the younger generation is really the trainer, and they tell them what to do, then they can call the owner, and the owner loves to hear, what the doctor said, and they believe that, where actually the veterinarian is probably the last person that I ask, and as I said to you the other day, and I got to say this in a humble way, because they'll say, well, are you boasting? No, I just want to tell you realistically, I was known for getting horses that were in terrible form when I got them, and turning them around and making them good for a long time. We certainly did back in my claiming days, but probably I would go get a sense of them, train them, and then maybe the Joe Brandow who did my shoeing and Tom Oliver who did my veterinary work would go that way. But I'm not into what a lot of them do. They get into with the veterinarian a diagnosis that's somewhat ornate, if you will, kind of a complicated one, and it usually is not a complicated thing. They say it's an EPM or something like that, but my experience, but I'm not typical. Everybody says, well, they all have EPM. Well, I had 1 or 2, I think, over my entire career. They had EPM, and I treated them, and they got better. So, yeah, I don't see it that way. EPM was a wonderful thing. When they can't diagnose them, well, then they can tell the owners that they have EPM, and it's nobody's fault. So
let's
so just to finish off, as far as the way I would do is get a sense of what the horse is doing. It's usually, pretty straightforward. I'll give you an example. Lady Matt Gillane, I've mentioned the other day, that is how I kind of met Horners. They said they had taken her to Dr. Bramlage, and he said that there was nothing wrong with her, and how now that she jumped over shadows. Well, I saw her 2 days later at Peretti out in Paris, Kentucky, jump the fence, and you could easily see it was a right knee, and then a live left splint right below the left knee.
Wow.
It was pretty obvious, really. It was nothing that you would need any kind of a scan or have to send it to somebody as diagnostically famous as Dr. Bramlage, but that's been my experience. All I know was we did that, and she turned around and had an excellent year after that. So.
Gotcha. So yesterday I was able to talk with a gentleman by the name of Michael Brink. Are you familiar with Michael Brink, a.k.a. the Brinkman?
No.
Okay, so he's a top trotter trainer here in the state of Illinois. He's got 60 head, and when I rolled into Springfield, literally at like 10:30, a half hour before the races, Mike's like, "Get up in the grandstand! Come on, get up in there!" Because these horsemen here tell me what to do, and I love it. So.
Yeah.
I asked him, do you have anything?
I'd love to see it too. I'd love to see the Illinois Fair circuit, because if I'm not in the major races, now you can watch them with wonderful quality, on HD TV and on the computer and that. So, and you don't have to drive home a couple of hours after or whatever. Where the fairs, that is certainly an event, that's an all-day, and it goes way beyond the actual races. Even if you have lesser horses, I enjoy it more. It's like I enjoy the early meet at Lexington, the one that starts, typically was starting around Hamiltonian Day, a little earlier, I think, the last couple of years. But I really, really enjoy that. I mean, that's for sure, so I enjoy the whole Illinois thing. But how'd you get along? You went to the grandstand?
Back to the Illinois State Fair, we have a page that everybody's working on now called the Springfield Harness Racing 2021 page. I'm going to give a shout-out to Kurt Becker, amazing announcing, and lots of, here we go again, another dropped call. It's amazing how he's going to tell me that it's a dropped call when it could be a bad zone, or maybe he's just dropping calls. We're calling him right back on the record. We're still recording.
Sorry, there's a lot of trees.
So
Well,
shout out to Kurt Becker.
I think I'll have no drop in
But we had Troy Market. I don't know if you've heard this name, a good friend of Kurt's, who was actually up in the announcer's booth, like you're saying, shooting race by race. We had 10 races and 7 qualifiers. I personally shot with high-def widescreen these 10 races. Are you familiar with...
Similar to what James had it. Did you see the baby races at Gateway Farms and Magic Lakers? I mean, the picture was phenomenal.
Yes.
At one point you say, well, why don't some of the tracks, have that? And then they blame, well, how Rogers has the monopoly in that, but I can't imagine why, with today's technology, that it would cost hundreds of thousands to put a high-def signal up there, because today that is the demand. I mean, now, relative to that, if you watch races at some of these tracks, you don't have the high-def, you feel like you can't even see the race.
So,
see the horses very
back to Illinois, are you familiar with a mare by the name of Armbro Bahrain?
Well, it would be an older mare because Armbro has been dismantled for years now.
It's a King Conch mare. Are you familiar with King Conch?
King Conch, yeah. Uh-huh,
okay, so King Conch, I can't say it correctly. So I'm interviewing Mike, and I said, is there anything promising on the 2-year-old filly or colt side? And he smiled, as he normally does. And I said, is there anything... that's broken loose in the field or injured, because last year he had some latecomers that got injured during the year. Now, you just hit the nail on the head. When these horses are young, how susceptible are they to injury when they're out in the field? And then what does that do as, to a trainer as far as having promises for a horse? And then one day you find them with a cut leg or they injure themselves. I mean, these things happen.
You're talking to a guy who's careful about the paddocks, because I've seen a lot of horses go the paddocks down and come in lame, but now they seem to want them out in paddocks all the time.
Correct.
Because they're worried about tying up as well. But that mare that I told you about that I had, Lady Magdalene, when she came into training, she was never turned out. She didn't tie up, and they said she was a tie-up horse. I'd rather have her on the track longer, warm them up, loosen them up. At the end of the year, if the year is over, and, you control the paddock, you start them out kind of in a smaller, confined area and get them, so eventually you can turn them, into a bigger space, maybe with other horses. It does prevent injury. The other thing I worry about, when you go to look at yearlings, they turn them out in the paddock, which I don't. I mean, I bought some great horses, and I teased Steve Stewart about that. I mentioned Steve and I are good friends. I bought, Muscle Hill Holiday Road, From Above. I could name a few more, but I won't. But when I went out to Steve's, and he had one called The Franchise. It was the Muscles Yankee out of Creamy Mimi, the first one. And
Steve,
I said, I don't
what
like
Steve
them.
are we
Steve
talking
Stewart at
about?
Hunterdon Farm.
Steve Elliott? Steve
Stewart.
Which Steve are we talking about here?
Steve Stewart of Hunterdon Farm.
Oh, Steve Stewart. Okay.
Yeah.
So
Steve, got me to turn out The Franchise, and I still didn't really like it. But I thought, well, you say that, but all anyway, I bought him $180,000. He wasn't very good. So, but to me, that doesn't make sense either. When the yearlings come in to be prepared, somebody comes, different customers, and they get turned out 2, 3, 4, 5 times a day. It's not natural that you chase them across the paddock, they jam the brakes on, then you go buy them at the sale and wonder, well, why they have a fracture or something. It doesn't make sense.
Interesting. So back to these 2-year-olds, okay? I'm just going to, try to have a conversation with you on these 2-year-olds. So I said to him, do you have any promises?
I don't know anything about them.
Well, that's why I'm asking.
I guess why I'm getting away. I've never seen them. I don't know who they are.
I understand. I'm talking like a trot man with a trot man. So, are you familiar with Fox Valley Qatar?
I don't know that I'm a trot man. I'm a horseman. I grew up with them. I do what I'm supposed to do. I don't think I do anything special, really.
So you consider yourself a dual gate trainer? You can train both pacers and trotters.
Again,
Or do you have a specialty? That's the question.
I hear people say that, but I've had success at both gates, and I don't think it's, my dad, Bernard Peck, was kind of ahead of his time. He was quite ahead of his time, and he said about training horses that if you got the old Karen training, the original one, and you read that, and you had common sense, you're a good worker, you could probably train a standardbred pretty well.
Exactly.
So, but then it becomes an instinct which you can't train. That's probably, again, with humility, what I have is an instinct, a feel for things, the same as I walk into a seminar room and they tell me, okay, this is the issue in Chicago. Let's say I'm at the American Dental Association, and they say, well, what's just broken is the dental hygienists in certain states want to have their own clinics, and we don't think that's a good idea, but 60 Minutes has broken a story on it. What do you do about this? Well, it becomes an instinct, because I'm not an expert, certainly in dentistry or hygienist clinics or anything like that. So I think instinct, that's something that you kind of can't really acquire. The other thing about training horses is Dr. David Mears, I think David was the second, and then you have David the third now, who successfully runs Concord Stud Farm. He does very well, David. His father said to me one time about training horses, if you're not born into it, it's maybe not easily acquired.
Exactly.
And he's got a point there.
Exactly.
So I was born into it. It's probably something that comes more naturally to me.
So just real quick, just to give a shout out to Mike Brink, the Brinkman. Last year he had basically the state champion, Fox Valley Qatar. You know where that horse was bred. So Fox
Valley would be Dr. Walker.
Correct. At Walker Standardbreds, their sales coming up over.
I spoke to him last winter, I guess, Doc. He was, again, a friend of my Dr. Jerry Joseph G. Peck, that was instrumental in my uncle being appointed to the Illinois Racing Board.
One of the strongest handshakes in the industry. I'll just leave it at that. But just to give a shout out to them, Fox Valley Cairo is an up-and-coming $34,000 purchase from Fox Valley Standardbreds, half brother to Fox Valley Qatar. But here's the sleeper, okay? Fern B, okay? This is a Psychic Spirit mare named Frontier.
Well, the Psychic Spirit was a decent horse. He was actually an Armbro Gold, and he was also, of course, the sire of Southern Rocket Top.
Exactly.
But he was trained in New Jersey by John Marshall, who's from New England, and John and Susan Marshall bought a pretty good mare I always tease about called Nicole's Promise at the Meadowlands when they had a yearling sale. But Psychic Spirit was pretty good. He was owned by Paul Fontaine in Rhode Island, who was a lawyer and USTA director as well. But obviously Psychic Spirit was famous for Southern Rocket Top.
Okay, but now you're reading my mind. You said New England, and that's exactly where I was segueing into. Is there? Hold on now. Hold on. Is there something with the Northeast in developing horses? Being from Nova Scotia, is there something with the Northeast quadrant, I guess, of North America with raising horses? Is it the weather?
Maybe.
Is it the...
Well,
I mean, there's got to be something.
Bob Marks, who I talked about, Bob says that something about maritime people are different. That, whether you watch, the Perfect Storm movie, which is Massachusetts, obviously, or when I think about, my upbringing in the Maritimes, but I notice on the Jersey Shore, if you go and you hit the local places, it's a different kind of person, it seems, who grows up near the ocean. I don't know if there's something to that or not, but maybe there is. I don't know.
What about people from PEI? Same thing?
Well, but again, it's a maritime province, and it's the smallest one, and it's considered the Kentucky of Canada.
Okay, so let's segue into
they
this.
Love the horse racing there. They really are entrenched in horse racing there for sure.
So when I was in Japan, I was hired by a gentleman from England, and he was on his way out, and they brought in a woman to run the show who was from PEI. And there was 2 other people in our group. We had 10 people in Osaka, Japan. We were all specialists. And I'll tell you what, she was very, very different. And from a cultural standpoint, she didn't understand my international exposure as an English instructor coming with a business background because she came from education. So you're saying the philosophy or the regime of maritime horsemen is much different from people?
No, I'm not saying that. It might be just a feel is different. It's probably, probably the same on the Northeast In the Midwest, the Chicago influence probably, there's a difference there. I would think maybe there's something about, because remember the fact that you have the fairs and the cornfields and horses are conditioned differently probably in those smaller areas. Like my uncle had a forest preserve that went for 5 miles behind him, so they weren't on a racetrack, they were conditioned there. And where we were from, you condition them on the track, but sometimes in the winter, when I was younger, you'd have a sleigh, or you couldn't get on the racetrack, and you'd have them out on the Trans-Canada Highway, which had what was called a measured mile, where you'd go on the shoulder of the road. So, there's certainly a different feel to it. What segued us into this, you were asking me, about trotters and pacers and stuff like that, and I said to you, I don't know if there's such a thing as I guess, what it probably is, if you ask somebody who knows how to sing, but seems to be able to sing several genres, it comes easy to them. I guess there's probably an element of that.
And that's why people from PEI and myself from Chicago, we had another person from Chicago, were hired by ECC, the #1 language school, literally in Japan. We worked on the floor of the president and CEO. He saw us every day, and it was because of the clarity of our voices. And you have that clarity. You have that clear, if I can say, Midwestern accent like myself, where people can understand us. We can grade our language. We can speak at a level that anybody can understand. So just to tease you...
Well, maybe we're a little down to earth, but I always said, though, it's not an appealing accent. I never thought that it was. You kind of had to
from
work
a presentation,
on not having it. Because when you think about you go to Chicago or Houston or California or somewhere, you really didn't want to sound like a maritimer from Canada. But now the world is a lot more international. It doesn't seem to matter anyway. Certainly earlier in my career,
just saying from a teaching and from a presentation standpoint. So just to give you the name of this horse. The filly that he was teasing me with is named Fern B out of Cease, and he's named this horse.
Cease was a nice horse that raced Victor at a Cantab Hall, and he was the year of Holiday Road.
Correct.
So he was a pretty nice horse.
So he named the horse Fern B.
Or was he the year from above? I forget now. He might have been the year from above. I forget. It was one of the other Holiday Roads.
I'm going to say it a third time. He named the horse Fern B after his mother, and if you see this qualifier, not even a qualifier, I think he was schooling the horse. But this is the Division I 2-year-old filly trot. And what he did was he put Paul Cavett on the horse, and he drove Ironclad Creation, which is a Credit Creation stud, or filly, out of a Broadway Hall mare. And what they did was they sat at the back of the pack, and at the end of the race, Paul Cavett comes up for 5th and gets a check for $100, 5% of $2,000. So
yeah, but it was fun though.
These are two promising horses that we see on the Illinois circuit. I just wanted to throw that out there for Mike the Brinkman, Fern B, and Fox Valley Cairo. But I don't want to go a little bit too much longer.
Psychic Spirit. Which one was the Psychic Spirit?
The Psychic Spirit one was. Sorry, I got the documents all in front of me.
The Fox Valley one, Doc Walker wouldn't have a Psychic Spirit or a Cacique, I don't think.
No, this is the Fern B. It's because if I say it correctly, Linda Allhands corrected me yesterday. It's Cease.
Yeah.
Out of a mare named Frontier Kangolchik, which is a Psychic Spirit mare. But I don't want to go too much longer here. Our last edition kind of killed me. We've got, like I said, three other people.
You're breaking up there. You said that the dam was by Psychic Spirit.
Correct.
Yeah, which sounds more like he'd have some age on him now, Psychic Spirit.
But I don't want to go too much longer with this. We're almost at 35 minutes. Is there anything you wanted to add?
That's what I kind of want. I said to you, maybe we better off, or when I got a good signal, we could, do a clear 35 minutes.
Maybe we'll do a part 3. If we get a big response off this one, we'll do a part 3. But is there anything that you want to add before we sign out? Any more shout-outs or anybody in the industry you've been talking to that you've kind of woken up with your last interview?
Well, obviously, this was not a reflection of the last one. This was a more reactive, talking about horsemanship and different horses. We really didn't cover, what we discussed last in HISA, the whipping, the more current affairs, if you will. So this was obviously something, surprised me, but I went in the direction that you wanted.
Well, there's other issues going on in the industry right now. We all know them. The industry is a fraternity/sorority. There's different levels with the different types of people in the industry. We all know what's going on. We all see these stupid websites that promote stupid things, like the National Enquirer, like the New York Daily News, if I can say, and some of these other rag papers that I know. I mean, are you familiar now with what happened in Russia with Putin and the Russians kicking out the media?
You mean something as of recent?
As of literally in the last 5 or 6 hours.
We know that.
So I'm in direct correspondence with Anita Kumar. She is a correspondent with Politico, and she was sending pictures to the White House press people, and they didn't send them to the White House press wranglers. She did put them on.
About the whole Russian harness racing piece. Pete Spears has been there, huh?
Well, what I'm getting at is there's
a horse sales company and a master breeder. He's been there and told me all about it. You might want to talk about him.
What I'm getting at is there's control of information in this industry, and I think your last interview really kind of broke that, I guess, unwritten rule or law of the fraternity, I can say, and you've kind of made it interesting with your last interview.
But I got away from it. I'd say an interesting thing. The other day, James wanted to interview me at Gateway. And then I said, okay. And then when I went back to do the interview, he said, no, they don't want you to do it. And I got a sense it was Al Oster from the Institute of New Jersey. But I called Al and said, Al, don't feel bad about it, because Al, I'm always in a great relationship with, and he does certainly a good job, and he's worked in other industries. Matter of fact, he bred and owned Precious Money, Al, back in the day, which became quite a horse. But anyway, he's responsible. He reports to a board. So I said, well, it was like when Art Weesey was at the American Petroleum Institute, of Mr. Tillerson or Mr. Jameson, one of the other CEOs from Big Oil, told him not to do something. That's who he reported to. So, I have no problem with that, and I'm not surprised that I wouldn't call it nothing that I said that could not be verified and objectively true, but, if that's their position, I certainly understand that, because you have other issues now where, I touched on this the other day, you have the, New Jersey Horseman, and I shouldn't say all of them, but the SBOA, upset with Corral, which again, I'd be a poor one to talk about that, because I said if he never did another thing, I said the other day, I mentioned about Clayhorn, Ontario, that they'd have to build a casket the size of Ontario. It would be the same as New Jersey. It would be a smaller one, because it's a kind of a longer, narrower state. But, so I guess it's too bad that it's that way, because when things are out in the open, it just makes it a lot easier to resolve. But people are just not typically that way. They're uneasy with that, and they might accuse one of being bringing in drama and that, but it isn't that way. We're a small enough industry. We should be able to resolve within and move forward, like I said, because the casinos were lucky to have them. If we didn't have them, we really wouldn't be around. So I think we've got to embrace them, but we have to take it more seriously. It's not up to them to get the customers. It's up to us. So I think we'd be better off, let it all hang out, get it out in the open, long as it's true, and work together and embrace it. But life is just not that way, and we live in a time now where I even hear, some of the executives, from the racing organizations using terms, well, what do you want the rules to be more liberal? Like they're almost, I guess, what do they think they're with Fox saying that CNN is liberal, or the other way around, that CNN is saying Fox is conservative, or maybe Newsmax, which is ultra conservative. But I just find that we get into a lot of political views in harness racing, and we, get mad at each other over stuff that's true, but I mean, maybe the resolution would lie in the discussion.
Well, what we're
that.
getting into, and this is what I was trying to get before you digressed again, is the suppression of information and the suppression of a lot of different things. I'm not going to say these things, but our publication is directed at promoting the industry, not getting political, and keeping everything positive. And I'm not talking positive with drugs. If you're using, if you're injecting, you'll be found out. You'll be exposed, and that I think is what's happening in this industry. I'm just saying in general. I'm just saying in general. I'm just saying in general. There's going to be a lot happening. Let me explain
What I
this.
said to you the other day, if you could take the prescription meds that the horses had that were approved by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, Health Canada, and were able to use them, and again, to get the bacon soda, which is readily available to everybody, it would level the playing field, because a lot of this stuff is not detectable if there's no tracer in a certain drug that they get on the street or whatever. Well, how can they test for it? Another interesting conversation I had over there was John Tomasello, who, runs the New Jersey Racing Commission now. I said, because there was that, they were saying, well, the judges don't do their job. So I can tell you what, New Jersey, they have John, and John, the decision to disqualify What the Hill a few years ago, the Hamiltonian, whether you agree or disagree, was a very courageous decision. In other words, it would have been easier not to act, so I got to hand it to John. When you have him in charge, you have Peter Koch, the Meadowlands, you have Richard O'Donnell, who has been, he's in his 80s, and he's still, alive and doing really well. We've got some good people out there that we're lucky to have, so why not let them do what they need to do? I just gave you a good example there. Or New Jersey has Joe Trapanese that is involved in investigation, but he's very cooperative, and you have Bryce Cody and Five Stones out there working for Jeff Corral. I said this the other day, probably a great cross would be if you took Jeff Corral, with the Five Stones and the investigations and what do they do, and then on the other side, you have Russell and you have Joe, and certainly Joe, originally with the deal in New York, he went to Albany and he really, really struck a deal with them. But, as they say, there's two opposing sides that could really, really do well.
You're digressing.
You're digressing, Greg. We have some good people out there that we should cherish and continue to move forward with, and not bicker with one another.
You're digressing from the conversation. You're digressing from the goal of this publication to promote racing. Are you familiar with Bryce Coty? Are you familiar with Bryce Coty? Are you familiar with Bryce Coty?
But I don't think it is. I think what I just said is promoting.
You're not letting
racing,
me talk.
We have some
You're not
really
letting me
good
talk.
people that if we could just, as they say, kind of get everybody together and cross them, you'd have. You would just build a wonderful product, is what you would do.
Okay, but you're not understanding where I'm trying to get. Why don't we stick to some questions, and I'm going to end this out. We're at 42 minutes. Okay. I'm going to publish this. I'm not going to edit it. I'm not going to edit the photos. I'm going to put one picture. I'm going to publish this right now, right this second. Okay?
Okay.
Are you familiar with Bryce Coty?
Yeah.
Are you familiar
I know him
with
and his family, a very great
yes
family.
Or no question,
his father, Dell.
It's a yes or no question.
Wonderful guy. Scott did Muscle Hill's Teeth, his brother. Megan is married to Patrick LaChance. Exactly. You're talking a really, really nice family.
But we're getting political now. Because
not really. I'm just telling factually. Was Del Cody a good, honest horse trainer? Yes. Was Scott Cody good at doing horses' teeth? Does Bryce Cody work hard at his job? Yeah. Does Megan Cody, who's married to Patrick LaChance, have a good family and a husband who does very well? I don't know what's political about that. That's all pretty factual.
I'm trying to just have a conversation, and you're bringing up names with people on the East Coast, and I'm going to tell you this on the record and let everybody hear this. I really don't give a shit about the people out East. I really don't give a shit about your politics. It's affecting the whole entire international community, and you know what? You guys better straighten your shit out, because now I'm going to be honest. I'm going to talk like a Chicagoan. I'm going to talk over you, and I'm going to end this right now. So with that, I'm going to end this, and you have yourself a great evening. Please don't ever call me back again. And if you do, I'll put a restraining order on you. Cease and desist.
Okay.
Thank you, and have a great night.
You're welcome.
With that, we're going to end this episode. We're going to publish this for you out of respect, Mr. Peck. I don't want to be bothered anymore by you, and please refrain from calling my phone number, and have a great night.